Okay, well, I'm going to respond to a video today that's a bit of a fucking mess, to be quite honest. I hope that this response turns out not to be quite as much of a mess as the video that I'm responding to. This is going to be part of the Atheist Responds series, and it's also the third response I've made to Robert UK Christian Answers and his four-part series in which he has these kind of mock conversations with the likes of, in the first part, Peter Atkins. I've had to re-record this, by the way, because the first time I said Pizza Atkins, which probably sounds quite tasty, but it's certainly not his name. Peter Atkins and Richard Dawkins. Then in the second part, just Richard Dawkins. In this third part, just Richard Dawkins. Then in the fourth part, it's going to be Lawrence Krauss. But he has these kinds of mock conversations where he puts the words in their mouth. I have to say, of the four parts, it's this third part where perhaps the words he puts in the mouth of Richard Dawkins are the farthest away from what you would actually expect Richard Dawkins to say. But that isn't why the video that he makes is so muddled. I'm sure that will become clear as I play you the various clips of Rob and comment on what he has to say. Just to give you a basic overview then, the argument that Rob's going to try and make in this video is something along the lines that unless you believe in a divine creator, then you have no grounds whatsoever to set any store that the comments that you make are grounded in anything. I think probably the best thing I can do is just to hand you over to Rob, and so that you can hear what the guy has to say in his own words. So let's let Rob get on with it.
And he starts explaining to me how, you know, we're just the products of evolution, and that the evolutionary process, I should say, is solely about survival and just the propagation of our genes. And I'm listening, and he sounds extremely enthused and passionate about all this. And I just said, Dickie, obviously we were on first name basis by that point. I said, Dickie, I said, does that apply to our minds too, what you're explaining? And he said yes.
Okay, so as I got across this point of the video, I thought he was going to make something along the lines of Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, which is not to be confused with the argument that if evolution is true, then since our most recent common ancestor with the other great apes, we have lost most of our body hair, which means that you're going to get pretty fucking cold, so put some fucking clothes on. Now, that is the evolutionary argument against naturism. Alvin Plantinga's argument is the evolutionary argument against naturalism, which is a very different thing, which is that if evolution is true, if you accept evolution as true, then you have no good reason to regard your cognitive faculties as reliable, and therefore no good reason to trust to philosophical and methodological naturalism. Of course, there are very many arguments that can be made against that, both in terms of the arguments that Alvin Plantinga uses to prop up that argument, which often tend to be of quite a simplistic form, where you can see them work in the specifics of the example. But if you apply them to a more complicated set of behaviours such as we have in the real world, it's hard not to see how those things would be falsified through experience. It's kind of hard how to do that unless you're talking about the kind of global error that we could make, such as the error that perhaps the idea of a holographic universe, that we're all labouring under this misapprehension that the material world around us is real, whereas perhaps it could be a kind of representation and the universe actually takes place on some kind of membrane, and what we regard as the real space around us is actually just an illusion. But of course, if that is true, then that is an illusion whether God exists or not. And the same thing is true with things. The idea being the corollary to what he has to say, Alvin Plantinga, is that if God exists, then our cognitive faculties would be reliable, because obviously that's what God would give us. But of course we know that our cognitive faculties are not entirely reliable, because things like optical illusions manage to fool us. So if God is prepared to give us in part unreliable cognitive faculties, then I don't think that you can say anything about how reliable our cognitive faculties would be if they were God-given. And perhaps we have more grounds to think they're reliable if evolution is true than if our cognitive faculties derived directly as a direct act of creation from a divine sentient agent. But that isn't actually the kind of argument Rob makes. As I said, the video's a bit of a fucking mess. So listen to what Rob has to say next.
I said, does that apply to our minds too, what you're explaining? And he said yes. He said, yeah, including everything in our minds, and hence that's why everything else that we believe are just the products of social and cultural memes. He said, including all this mumbo jumbo that we believe about superstitions and star signs and fairies and God. It's all just the products of social cultural memes.
Okay, so Richard Dawkins is often credited for introducing the term meme and introducing the idea of having a kind of unit of cultural selection that can evolve, which is what the idea of the meme is. But Richard Dawkins would never make a statement like this. Richard Dawkins, let us remember, is a very firm proponent of evolutionary psychology, which means that he thinks that there are innate parts to our understanding and to our beliefs and to our characters, etc., etc. So this really doesn't sound like the kind of statement that Richard Dawkins would make in a million years, to say that everything that we believe is entirely cultural. But not only that, this is now a completely different statement to the statement that Rob had made previously. The basis of Rob's original part of his video was the idea that we have evolved a set of beliefs and characteristics, that we've evolved an understanding of the universe and of a way of thinking. But now he's gone and said, oh no, it's entirely cultural. It's gone from an entirely nativistic argument to saying these are all learned behaviours, these are all learned beliefs. That's just an entire switch that he's made here, and in doing so he's put some words in Richard Dawkins' mouth that I'm sure he'd never say in a million fucking years. But then Rob carries on, and watch how he now flits back to his original fucking argument again.
I sat back and I just sat my pint. It's all very interesting, but then I thought, and I said to him, I said, Dickie, I said, but that belief, your belief in naturalism as a worldview, and in this idea of memes that you've got, how are those beliefs just the products of the need to survive and the need to propagate our genes? And he just sort of looked at me and stared at me for a minute, and then he just sort of went, looked at his watch, he said, is that the time? And he shut off.
So now you can see we've gone full circle again. Now we're back to these beliefs being based on the need to survive and the need to propagate our genes. So we've gone all the way back to them being based on innate components, whereas only a few seconds ago it was based entirely on culture. These were entirely learned things. There's almost something biblical in this video. If I can draw anything from this video, it's almost like reading the book of fucking Genesis, of stories like something like Noah's flood, where you have two accounts of the flood being written one after the other. This video is almost like the same fucking thing. It almost reminds me of his intro that I critiqued the other week, where it looks like it's been made by committee and it's like two separate fucking intros that have been segued one after the other. It's almost as if we have the same thing here. We've got two totally separate arguments being made, both of them diametrically opposite to one another, and somebody's just kind of stitched the two fucking things together in some kind of really, really ignorant fashion. So now it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. If his argument is that these things are innate, then the same kind of issues come up with the evolutionary argument against naturalism, which I covered in very, very brief detail early on in this video. But if it isn't, if the idea that the argument, all these things are entirely cultural, well, I don't know what to say, because those aren't the kind of words that anybody like Richard Dawkins would make in the first place. So I think those arguments can be entirely dismissed, as can the entire video, really. So this was a bit of a mess to go through, this one, but I hope you found it in some ways enjoyable and enlightening. At least it's managed to give you a chance to sit down for about 10 fucking minutes rather than doing anything more constructive. So thank you for watching the video. Look out for part 4, where he will be in conversation with Lawrence Krauss. Yes, the real make-believe, I'll put my words in his mouth, Lawrence Krauss. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.